this panel is gonna dive into platform versus product. So it's gonna explore the cyclical enthusiasm in the VC community in platform technology companies versus single asset companies. So I will take a moment and just ask that the panelists introduce themselves, and if you can just describe a little bit about your background, the history of your companies in the context of this particular topic. Yeah, go for it. This is on.
Check.
Oh, is mine not on?
Everyone can hear me? All right. Hi, I'm Kapil Sharma. I'm the founder and CEO of Vira Regen. We are a biotech startup based in Salt Lake City. And we use electric stimulation to regenerate tissue, speed up bone fracture healing and wound healing. And yeah, our core technology is a platform technology, so I may come from that perspective. But we can essentially use electric stimulation to turn certain genes on and off to enhance therapeutic effect. So funded by the DoD, or Department of War, I should say, and preclinical stage. And yeah, first focus is really on healing bone fractures. And so we were able to speed up fracture healing 50% faster in our early preclinical data. And we're moving forward to clinical stage. And yeah, we have some indications that we'll use our core technology into, which we'll probably highlight or talk about in osteoarthritis and cancer. And then quick 10-second background, bioengineering background from University of Utah. Yeah, I help run Altitude Lab, which is Recursion Startup Accelerator, and which Rachel's on the board of as well. And yeah, I guess the young gun on the block, helping yeah, build up the ecosystem. Thanks.
Thanks, Kapil. Okay, my name is Rachel Jones. I'm the Chief Product Officer at a company called VedaBio, which is not a Utah company. Boo, I know. It's based out of San Diego. But I used to work for BioFire, Idaho Tech BioFire. I was there for just about 15 years, setting up the whole commercial organization within that company, which went on to take the film array from $0 to $1 billion in about a decade. So awesome company. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with it. Super fun time. I would say, don't be fooled by my Chief Product Officer title. I think products are important, but platforms also essential. So excited to chat through this topic with you guys today. Background in molecular biology, that was my education, and then sort of pivoted to the dark side of commercial a few years into my career.
Great. So I'm Ryan Watts, Utah native, and I'm a grandpa. I have 2 grandchildren. So I'm clearly the wise one on the panel. So if you guys want some like clear and direct answers, come to me. I work for a company, founded a company in the Bay Area and here in Salt Lake City. Very, very proud member of BioUtah and BioHive, Denali Therapeutics. My background is from the University of Utah as an undergrad, where I studied developmental neurobiology and then did that at Stanford as well, got a PhD, and then worked for a number of years at Genentech, which is maybe like the BioFire of the Bay Area, I guess, or the first biotech company in history. And so I was at Genentech for 11 years and then founded Denali. But I will say one thing. I hope no one is recording this. I had an experience earlier this week. I was at a couple Wall Street meetings, and I was quoted verbatim from the fireside chat from the Wall Street meetings in one of the trade press. So please don't record this, otherwise it will be a very boring panel. If you can promise me you're not going to record it, we're going to get into some fights, and we're going to say some pretty outrageous things on this panel.
We're going to make it very interesting for you. Okay, well, let's dive in. So, I mean, I think that there is a perception, whether true or not, and we should explore this, that in times of plenty, and especially in bullish markets like in biotech, you do tend to see investors hot and heavy for platform technologies. But then in economic downturn, you tend to see them favor single asset companies that have clear paths to profitability and reduce risk. I just want to, I guess, open up with a question for all of you. Is that your experience? And if so, where are we now?
Yes, okay. So, okay. for the past, I think for a lot of early stage founders, a lot of them are platform technology starting out, and then they get, as they prove that platform, they get a little bit more asset centric, right? That's usual tendency. At least in our experience, I mean, we really started the company in May 2023. So, kind of on that downturn, capital markets are still kind of hard. So I would never say platform. Even though I'm like, for me, for an investor side, as soon as I hit platform, they'd be like ghosting you on emails, not responding, or like it's not the right fit, that sort of thing. And so we would always kind of adapt and be like, okay, we're actually a bone company, but we can go into these other indications later, right? And so, yeah, it's been cycles, I think, for this past decade. Usually, I feel like 3 to 5 years is a platform, increase in platform investment, supporting those companies. And then, yeah, I mean, post-pandemic, we saw a whole downturn, when a lot of these assets from platform companies were not really coming to fruition. So it's been like that for a while now, but as of lately, it's easier to talk to pre-seed seed investors. They're starting to deploy a little bit more. And this is probably as of the past couple months, I would say. And so it feels like things are loosening up, at least for the early stage. So there may be a swing back up. And that's something I wasn't seeing, at least, these past 2 years when I'm trying to build our startup. Now there's a little bit more attention and easier to have that conversation. So at least that's my take.
Yeah, so I'll share my take from an IVD diagnostics standpoint. When you're selling systems into healthcare settings that require hardware and then a reagent to run on that hardware, platforms are king, because healthcare settings don't want to bring on a piece of equipment that's going to do one thing for them. And so I think this gets a little bit nuanced across, all of our specific areas that we're up here to talk to you guys about. But even within diagnostics, I think it gets nuanced a little bit more. So IVD is one layer of that, but I also previously worked at an LDT company where I actually think that for our Series A, the asset and the product was really important, right? There's one test that we're going to deliver. A lot of the diligence was built based on, this finding 1,500 pathogens in plasma. But when we pivoted to Series B, the investors really wanted us to talk about how we could exploit that underlying platform to bring more assets to the table. And so I think, the question is sort of, is this cyclical? I think there's a lot of things that come into play here. I think one is what you're doing and what part of sort of the biotech industry you're working in. But I think some of it also depends on sort of where you are in your life cycle of your product. That's at least the experience that I've had, again, heavily on the diagnostics side, because that's where most of my experience, all of my experience is from.
So both very good points. In the last panel that I was in, I had my colleague who kept calling me her wingman, and I'll just call her my boss. So it's Cindy. If I say something I shouldn't say, go like this. Like midway through, just like this, or there's Cindy right there, just so you guys know. So watch Cindy and you'll know if this is appropriate or not. So I think, by a show of hands, how many of you work for a product company? Just raise your hand. Okay. How many of you work for a platform company? Okay. I guess everyone else is lawyers. That's a lot of people that don't work for any company that does products or platforms. This was supposed to be really insightful, but in the end, like, most of you didn't raise your hand for anything. So services, how many of you work for a services company? Okay, there we go. That makes sense. I think what's really interesting in biotech is if you think about the life cycle of a biotech company. We did this in one of our board meetings like 3 years ago. We had a board meeting where we focused on what I call the survivors analysis. And it was, if you dream to become like Amgen or Regeneron or Vertex or Alnylam, some of the more recent, like, real success stories, what was their path to success? What was like the foundation of their technology and their products. And then that's, of course, a very biased analysis because you're looking at like 50 billion plus market cap companies that were extraordinarily successful. But if you then look in general at biotech, what happens, right? And I'm not these are not going to be accurate numbers, but I'd say on average, I'd say 90+% of biotech companies fail at the clinical stage and then they cease to exist. Okay, so that's a category. Like we go in, we run the clinical experiment, and it didn't work, and that's life of being a scientist and a physician and a drug developer. We get that. Then there are those companies that are in the clinic, their drug works, and then they get acquired. That's a huge bucket of the remaining 10%. And then there are those companies that like actually reach escape velocity and they produce products time and time and time again, right? And it's really interesting when you sort of categorically look at the companies in that way of product versus platform. I was doing a little bit of research to prepare for today's panel and imagining that. And a lot of the companies that have the one-hit wonders and get acquired, I mean, they may say they're a platform company, but they are a single asset company. And often they become a single asset company because basically the capital markets or the private equity forces that. That's all you can do. Basically, that's what you're left doing. So any platform company becomes a product company by necessity. But if you go to the survivor's bias, let's look at like Regeneron, for example, right? They had the Velosa mouse, which was like basically a humanized mouse that could produce antibody after antibody after antibody. They produced this, they have this collaboration with Sanofi. They then produce Dupixent. They have all these other products that they're using now. I think they would consider themselves a platform company, although originally founded to regenerate the nervous system, right? So I think in the end, this is my analysis, and I'm hoping that we'll disagree on the panel here and have a good debate about it. But I mean, it's all about products. In fact, after today's panel, I might change my title to Chief Product Officer, CPO, but I already have a Chief People Officer. I mean, it's like your platform has to produce products. Like that's what it has to do. And any investor, and in the downturn, the investor wants to know what's the product, what's the inflection point, what's their exit, what is their 10x or whatever they want to call it, 20x or what they're looking for. So it's always the product. So when and now the irony, Denali is a platform company, right? We are a platform company. We engineer brain delivery. We invent medicines that cross the blood-brain barrier with the goal of defeating degeneration. Like a little goal, easy diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, focusing on diseases maybe that are easier to start with or more tangible. But when we talk to investors, when does a drug get approved? What's the size of the market? What's your regulatory interactions? Tell me about, when's your biomarker readout? It is all product centric. And yet the platform is what powers that product, right? And so there are a handful of investors that think 100x or 1,000 or 2,000, and then they'll say that's the platform. We have a few of those investors who've been with us for a decade, and they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant, but they don't ignore that it's the products that come out of that platform.
Let's stay with Denali for a second. I want to run through a little bit of context and ask you kind of a specific question. So I'm gearing us towards a discussion around marketing and storytelling and catering to investor or, in your case, shareholder expectations. So you started Denali in 2015, right? And then you guys raised like an enormous Series A round, and then you went public 2 years later. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, and in 2021, I mean, I think interest rates were a little bit higher. The VC investments were a little bit slower, but then you started to expand on your platform. So can you talk a little bit about that and how your marketing and generally just your strategies with shareholders at that time changed?
Yeah, thank you for that specific question and for your own homework. Yeah, so we launched in 2015 with about 220 million in our Series A, and already the goal there was a broad set of products using a blood-brain barrier technology, and then like the rest of you, we rode the COVID wave that lasted for a couple years, right? And it was like the valuations were outrageous. I don't even want to look back in time and imagine what we were valued at in 2020, right? We also got our first data that showed that the platform was working, and then entered into a huge partnership with Biogen. So it was like, I think in the end we've raised about 2.5 billion on this platform through partnerships or through equity raise. But the storyline of platform, it fundamentally always come back to the blood-brain barrier platform. Again, the irony of the first comment, it's about products. But it's the fact that you can learn and then apply those learnings again and again and again. And then as biotech slumped, we had a very unusual thing happen. We were looking at partnerships, because a lot of times you survive in difficult times with a partnership, and we had an investor reach out and say, we want to uniquely accelerate and expand the platform right now. This is 2 years ago. Everyone's shrinking their portfolios. We should be shrinking our portfolio. And we did the exact opposite. And we accelerated our first BLA filing. We initiated 24 new programs at a time when literally like everyone was like just the single product. Because that's in that competitive environment, that was our chance to really accelerate this platform. I hope that answers your question. And so what's happened though is our shareholder base has massively shifted. So in the last 3 years, it's almost an entirely different shareholder base, where the initial venture backing is out of Denali. And now we have these long-term mutual funds and sovereign wealth funds that are looking for 100, 200, 1,000x. That's the goal. They're looking for that 1 or 2% of the survivors example, where the platform produces product after product.
Rachel, turning to you. So, in the diagnostic space, I know that you had joined BioFire in 2008, and then they launched the film array 2 years later, essentially. And you were instrumental in the corporate rebranding. There was a lot of growth financing, strategic expansion, and then you were acquired in 2014 by bioMérieux. So I'm curious how your marketing and storytelling changed to investors from like 2011 to 2014 in that time frame during that shift.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's any Idaho Techans or BioFire people out there, but
By a show of hands. Look at, there
there's
you go.
a few. So if, I think just to sort of paint a picture, our motto was we make cool stuff, literally, all over our building. And so there was we could talk about features, about rapid PCR, multiplex PCR, nested PCR, how fast our bead beater worked to break apart cryptosporidium. So it was very, very much a feature-based R&D company. And it survived being that way because initially all of the funding and the revenue stream for Idaho Tech and early BioFire was government grants and contracts, which were great because they would pay you to do a bunch of work, and then on the end of that there'd be a procurement contract and you'd sell to one customer. So when we launched the film array, we really had to change the way we were thinking and be a lot better about turning those features into outcomes and changing the way that we talked about what we were doing and why it mattered. Rolling in the economics about how we were going to save hospitals money. And it was, honestly, it was a pretty big whiplash event for, I think, the majority of people at BioFire who were very, very science and R&D focused to suddenly have marketing and sales be what all of the investors and the potential acquirers wanted to talk about. It was great for me and my team. I was like, yes, finally. We're not the redheaded stepchildren of this company anymore, whether you need us. But it was a big, big shift for the company to sort of, and even our story changed. I mean, when we launched, we were very much laboratory. These are the features of the system that are going to help you. And after we launched our fourth-ish panel product, we really pivoted more towards clinician value, how this was really going to impact the patient. So yeah, it was definitely an evolution of, sort of from that feature mindset to this outcome mindset that, that we went through.
Well, and now you're at a Series B company. Is there any differences between those experiences? And if so, what are they?
Well, yeah, hearing Ryan talk about the COVID wave, I guess, so for us at Veda right now, we're an infectious disease company that's using CRISPR as our detection technology. So we have like 2 black eyes coming into any investor conversation that we're having because there's a ton of skepticism around that. And I think that, yeah, it's a lot different. The investors have gotten a lot more savvy around elements of diagnostics that are critical to success. And these are things that we saw a lot of, I think, diagnostic companies flame out during COVID because of scalability, reimbursement, the ability to actually reach customers and build what you say you can build. And so it's great because I feel like we can leverage our experience and my experience that I've had being at BioFire, but those conversations for us in this Series B raise that we're having right now, there's a lot more knowledge around the critical elements to having a successful launch and product and company, not just around sort of the science of what you're doing.
Just want to make one comment about the COVID wave as you brought it up. Remember when biotech saved the world for like 6 months?
I'm so jealous, you guys.
I mean, it was like for 6 months, and then like now biotech and pharma is like killing everyone, you know? Yeah. Don't record that. Cindy's like, okay, next.
Kapil, I'll start with you. I mean, I think we need to talk a little bit about whether all platforms are made equal. And of course, we can't have this discussion without at least touching on AI platforms. I think we're seeing AI in the life sciences industry from drug development, discovery, and beyond. I mean, literally in everything. So what is it that differentiates a platform? Is it that you can make products, or what differentiates it from a science project?
Yeah, I think so. This is how I break it down. There's, at least in biotech, 2 different, and then please educate me on this as well, but 2 different types of platforms. There's like the new therapeutic modalities, which is essentially kind of all 3 of us. I mean, at least for Vira, Regen, there's that. Then there's the AI-powered engines based, right? They're using heavy computationally based techniques or ML techniques in the R&D of new immunotherapies or drug development, et cetera. So, but I think like those are the 2, I would say, differentiating factors. They have a lot of, I'm kind of jealous of the tech bio guys at times because they can definitely raise a little bit more venture capital than us new therapeutic modality platforms. But at the end of the day, like I still think, and this is what our experience has been, differentiating between, the actual company and what's just a science project type of thing. You got to prove the platform in your first use case. Have that example. Like when I saw in our research that okay, I can actually modulate, move, gene expression up and down mRNA proteomics just with frequency and voltage in cell lines and in tissue. Where do I apply this technology, right? And so we went to the DoD. It was much easier to get funding because, yeah, they have no problem with that right now. But you need that proof of concept, right? And so I think that took a long time because we were raising or are starting this company not around COVID time or anything like that, which I'm so jealous about. My God, you didn't have to have too much proof of concept data to raise at that time, right? But I think that's like the biggest like factor and strategy is like you gotta prove that concept first. And once you have that, then the platform is much easier to sell, understand, and there's a little bit more trust with that, and you can go from there.
Do you guys have any responses from the 2 of you? Otherwise, we'll talk a little bit about IP, which is the whole point of this panel. It's supposed to be about
maybe I'll
IP.
respond just so we don't have to talk about IP. I'm just kidding.
But no, I mean, I think that it segues well to what you just mentioned, which is that companies are forced to show proof of principle for their platform. Otherwise, the platform name, I think, does sort of become a bad word. And when you're thinking about IP strategies and protecting your platform with an eye towards then building out a robust pipeline like Denali, you need to think about resources and how you spend them, especially if you're a really early stage company. So I guess question for either of you, any of you, how do you think about IP strategy and trade secret protection versus patents and protecting your platform versus your pipeline, and what calculus did you make there?
Well, I think you'll see in diagnostics, and for those of you that are in the space, you probably know this well, there's a lot of trade secrets. In what we do, I think, you know, when you are, like for BioFire, right, like designing these assays, these multiplex assays for infectious diseases, there's the underlying what is enabling it to do that, which really was what was covered in our IP portfolio. But then the how you're doing that is what we decided to protect via trade secret, and really to just sort of reinforce that moat around that how. You know, that was the approach we took there. And honestly, it's the same approach we're taking at Veda right now. Our system is, there is a lot of trade secrets going on in there right now. And so I think it, you know, and I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say, but for a diagnostic, I think the trade secret path around things like sample prep and how you're, you know, extracting nucleic acids, those can be fairly special sauce recipes that you don't really want to go down the patent path with.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, at least for us, because we're just starting out, right? And so we have our first, like, you know, we're a therapeutic med tech, so it's a little bit similar metrics to or process with diagnostic, right? A lot of my IP protection is really focusing on our limb brace bone fracture healing device, right? You know, but yeah, there's some preliminary data, like internally, that we have on downregulating PD-1 in oncogenes, or cancer and osteosarcoma, you know, other things in osteoarthritis, things like that. But I don't really patent those yet until, like, we keep it a trade secret type of thing. We keep it internal until I see there's, like, I look into kind of like, all right, is this the market I really want to go into? I don't want to spook investors like, hey, we're doing all these things, guys. This is, you know, 2020. And just keep it, at least our strategy, keep it almost like a trade secret. And typically what I do to validate is also some, you know, grant opportunities arrive either from CDMRP or yeah, other non-dilutive funding opportunities that I just submit through our non-dilutive, our preliminary data to these non-dilutive opportunities. And if they so happen to hit, I can build that out internally. And when I feel like it's ready to commercialize, right, like our bone fracture model is clinical stage, getting there, now I have enough, you know, it's the right time to go into the other pipelines. Let's start IPing that, right?
Yeah, I will say though, there's a tension because you want to go out and tell investors that you've got proof of principle on your platform, right? You want to go to conferences like JPM and be able to talk about that stuff. So what do you know, so what do you do? So I will say, in my experience with platform therapeutics companies, a lot of times what I see is you pick a program that is your proof of principle program. It's the one you raise all your money on. It's a decent program, but you know it's not your lead. And then the second program that you do is the one that's completely under stealth that you don't talk to anybody about until you're actually ready to start that program. So you have published manuscript, peer-reviewed, you know, journal articles about your first program, and while it may be related, it's a distinct mechanism of action. It may be a different molecule. So that's one strategy I've seen work well.
I think this is probably the right point or time in the panel for me to disclose that Wilson is our corporate counsel, and they're amazing. It's a little advertisement.
Same.
Side note. Yeah, yeah. No, like amazing. But just a comment or two about IP. So it's different, and it's actually very. I'm learning as I sit on this panel because it's different in therapeutics, but it's also evolving rapidly. And probably the biggest evolution is the ability for China to, like, catch up immediately. You publish, your patent publishes, immediately you have competition. And earlier this week, I was in a fireside chat and was asked the question about competition, which to me has a huge component of intellectual property. And And what I said and what I firmly believe is that in biotech, if you do not have competition, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And the further along you are, the more you should expect everyone else to be doing what you're doing. And for me, for us in particular, the explosion of transferrin receptor enabled brain shuttles is a consequence of actually clinical validation, either from our Hunter, actually really from our Hunter syndrome trial and from the Roche brain shuttle trial. And it's a great thing. It's actually a great thing for patients, when everyone starts making their PD-1s and their VEGF PD-1s and whatever the, GLPs and you're driving now competition, but IP is so fundamental around that. And so I'll tell you our strategy, which is actually our general counsel in-house is an IP attorney. That's how important intellectual property is to Denali. We don't have someone who's trained in like corporate matters, trained in intellectual property. And I think the key for us was to build IP around the platform, and then around the products, and then around the methods, and all the above, and heavily invest with outside counsel, internally, and it's a little different. Like, our strategy has been to publish a lot. We love to publish. I think last year was a great example for us where we've published, we had a paper in Cell on Alzheimer's mechanisms, Science Translational Medicine. We had a science paper on our A-beta antibody, and then we ended the year with a New England Journal article on our Hunter program. And in order to publish, you have to file the patents. Like, you can't keep a secret. And you have to lead, but recognize everyone's coming after you. And frankly, it is the very best thing for patients, the very best. And if you don't win, then, and someone else does, well, guess who actually wins? It's the patients, because that product was better. And so I think the intellectual property piece is foundational to your products and your platforms.
Well, with that, I just want to thank you, all three of you, for being here and sharing your thoughts on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.